we have two marriage laws. One for straight couples, the Marriage Act 1949, and the other for same-sex couples, the Marriage Same-Sex Couples Act of 2013. So it's a form of like what I call sexual apartheid. You know, one law for straight marriages, another law for same-sex marriages. That is not equality. You know, separate is not equal. What the government should have done, and which I argued unsuccessfully, was simply repeal the ban on same-sex marriage, which was only introduced in 1971. Until 1971, there was no ban on same-sex marriage. The 1949 Marriage Act does not stipulate that marriage partners have to be male and female. So there is no legal impediment to same-sex marriage until the passage of the Nullity of Marriage Act of 1971. That law was brought in because same-sex, in particular trans couples, sought to marry. Some of you may have heard of the famous case of April Ashley, a very well-known celebrity transgender woman who sought to marry and then divorce, eventually, her male partner, and to stop her from being able to claim on her former husband's estate, they declared her marriage null and void and brought in this Nullity of Marriage Act to ensure that no same-sex couples could in future marry. So the ban on same-sex marriage only lasted just over 40 years. When people say it's always existed, they're speaking nonsense. The ban has only been around for 4 decades. The campaign to end it, well, of course April Ashley and some others did initially try in the late 60s, early 70s, but were unsuccessful in overturning the ban. It wasn't until 1992 that the LGBT Direct Action Group Outrage reignited the campaign when we organised 5 same-sex couples to file applications for civil marriage at Westminster Registrar Office in London. They made their applications, of course they were refused, but that was the opening shot in the campaign. And then Outrage, with the support of the Lesbian Gay Christian Movement, the Gay and Lesbian Humanist Association, and a few others, pursued the campaign, continued the campaign through the rest of the 90s and the early part of the 21st century. With, I've got to say, very little support from other LGBT organisations. And particularly when civil partnerships were legislated, the consensus among most LGBT people was civil partnerships are good enough. Our response was, no, they're not. Because again, separate is not equal. To establish a system where same-sex couples are banned from civil marriage and opposite-sex couples are banned from civil partnerships, that is not equality. In our view, we always argue consistently, civil partnerships and civil marriages should be open to everyone without discrimination. So we won half that campaign. We now have same-sex marriage, albeit not truly equal marriage, but we still don't have equal civil partnerships. Still to this very day, heterosexual couples are banned by law from having a civil partnership. And that surely is just as bad as the ban on same-sex marriage. We have a number of discriminations in the Marriage Act of last year, the Same-Sex Marriage Act. First of all, there is a specific legal restriction on the Church of England and the Church of Wales. Even if they eventually decide they want to conduct religious same-sex marriages, under the current law, they are prohibited from doing so. So that's not only homophobic, it's also an attack upon religious freedom. It's saying the Church of England and the Church of Wales are not allowed to conduct same-sex religious marriages, even if they wish to. The other issue, which is Major is the way in which pension inheritance entitlements are very different for same-sex marriages compared to opposite-sex marriages. So to give you an example, in a heterosexual marriage, if a couple have both been paying their pension, let's say, since 1990, if one partner dies, the surviving partner will be able to inherit their pension contributions dated back to 1990. But if they're in a same-sex marriage, they can only by law inherit their partner's contributions back to 2005. So in other words, the surviving partner will lose 15 years of pension entitlement from the deceased partner. Again, very clear discrimination, motivated solely and exclusively by penny pinching on the part of the government. As you may know, just recently the government concluded a consultation on the future of civil partnerships. It set out 3 options: to completely abolish civil partnerships and force all existing civil partners to convert to marriage, even if they don't want to, even against their wishes. That's option 1. The second option was to retain existing civil partnerships, but allow no new ones. So the existing civil partnerships would be sort of in a limbo land. And the third option, which I've argued for, is that civil partnerships should be retained and also extended to opposite-sex couples. You know, to give heterosexual men the right, the choice, the freedom to choose a civil partnership if they wish. The government has promised that it will come up with a proposal by the end of this year. I'm not really sure why the government needed to do this new consultation, because back in 2012, you probably recall that the government consulted on same-sex marriage. And at my insistence, they included the question, should civil partnerships be retained if civil marriage becomes law, and if so, should straight couples be able to have a civil partnership? I think the government thought no one would support it. We'll put this in because that will humour Peter Tatchell, get him off our backs. To their surprise, 61% of respondents in the public consultation said yes, civil partnerships should be retained and should be available to opposite-sex couples. Only 24% disagreed. So already the government has a clear mandate to open up civil partnerships to straight couples. And really, to be honest, the current or recent consultation was superfluous and unnecessary. But we are where we are, and let's hope that enough people did respond this time to ensure that the message gets through loud and clear that civil partnerships should be open to all. In terms of other unfinished business, there are quite a few issues. Perhaps very notably, the existing equality laws, the new equality laws that have been introduced over the last decade or so. They're great, but they all include limited qualified exemptions for religious organisations. Not just places of worship, but also faith-run schools, hospitals, nursing homes, and shelters for the homeless. Any religious organisation is allowed under our equality laws to discriminate in the employment of staff and the provision of services to clients if they can show that it's necessary to maintain their, quote, religious ethos. Now my view is people of faith are entitled to their point of view about sexual orientation and gender identity. You know, I wish they were all going to support equality, I wish they didn't harbour any prejudice, but in a free society, they're entitled to hold those points of view. What they're not entitled to do is to discriminate. You know, I would never dream of discriminating against a person of faith. You know, I would defend a person of faith if they were suffering discrimination. But many of them argue that they should be exempt from the law, they should be above the law, they should have the right to discriminate against LGBT people. They wouldn't like it if it was being done to them, yet they're prepared to do it to LGBT people. That's simply not fair. It's not right. And so we really do have to amend those equality laws to ensure that faith organisations have the same rights and the same responsibilities to not discriminate as everyone else. Another outstanding issue is homophobic bullying in schools. We know from the research that more than half of all young LGBT people say that they were bullied at school. Bullying ranging from name-calling and teasing to threats, menaces, and actual physical violence. In the school classroom, in the school playground. That's truly, truly shocking. Thankfully, down to the efforts of black communities, racism has become much less prevalent in our schools. And there's a lot of peer-to-peer pressure to challenge racism. But today in schools, the most common insult is gay. That's gay, you're gay, this thing's gay, don't like that, it's gay. That's the most common insult in our schools today. And we find that despite the scale of homophobic bullying, only about half of all schools have an anti-bullying program that specifically addresses homophobia. Likewise, sex and relationship education in our schools is very, very patchy and often is non-inclusive of LGBT kids. So I was just speaking at a school the other day and several people said, boy, our sex and relationship education was fantastic if you're heterosexual. There wasn't a single word about same-sex relationships. And the same when it goes with HIV prevention and safer sex education, not a word, they said, about safe-sex education and HIV prevention for people in same-sex relationships. Which is pretty extraordinary because, as we know, the average age of first sexual experience for both young gay and straight kids is now about 13. So they're potentially putting themselves at risk. They need the information. They need the advice. They need to be encouraged to adopt safer sex practices to protect them and their partners. Sadly, so far, that is not happening in most schools. I'd also like to see the introduction of equality and diversity lessons in all schools, from the first year of primary school, to challenge prejudice. Not just prejudice against LGBT people, but racism, misogyny, disableism, and all other forms of prejudice. And why do I say that? Because children are not born bigoted, they become bigoted because of the bad influences of other kids around them and adults. If we can educate young people through equality and diversity lessons to be understanding and accepting of others who are different from themselves, I think we're going to reduce the levels of all prejudice. We'll increase the likelihood of those young people growing up to have a non-prejudiced and non-discriminatory outlook towards others. But, like sex and relationship education, so far, those equality and diversity lessons are simply not happening. Another big issue is, of course, the plight of LGBT refugees who are fleeing persecution in homophobic countries like Uganda, Iran, Russia, Nigeria, and many, many other countries. At the moment, about 80 countries still criminalise homosexuality in all circumstances, with penalties ranging from a few years imprisonment right up to life imprisonment for consenting private same-sex relations. In a handful of Islamist countries, there is actually the death penalty for same-sex relations under Sharia law. Of the countries who have still the criminalisation of same-sex relations, more than half are members of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth, which claims to its Commonwealth Charter that human rights, equality, diversity and non-discrimination are core Commonwealth values. These are the values that bind the Commonwealth together, they say. Yet more than half of all the world's countries that criminalise same-sex relations are members of the Commonwealth. In fact, of the 53 member states, 80% still criminalise same-sex relations, with 7 countries still having life imprisonment. Uganda, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Guyana, Sierra Leone, and so on. Life imprisonment. So you can see that the plight of LGBT people in many countries around the world is very grave. They come here to seek refuge, to find a safe haven, often after experiencing threats or violent attacks, sometimes having experienced imprisonment, even torture, in instances having actually experienced attempts to kill them or their partners. They come here for a place of refuge, and what do? We stick them in an asylum detention centre, which is in effect a prison by another name. In fact, refugees in asylum detention centres have fewer legal rights than rapists and murderers. They can't possibly prepare a proper asylum claim when they're locked up behind bars. They have very limited access to their solicitors. They can't have the freedom to get witness statements and corroborating documents. Moreover, many of those put into asylum detention centres are put on a system called fast track, where they have roughly about 14 days to make an application, have an adjudication, and have an appeal. It's, as the name says, fast track. And in that short space of time, no one can possibly prepare a proper asylum application or an appeal. It's just physically impossible. Likewise, the government has cut legal aid, so on the money now available, it is impossible for asylum solicitors to prepare a proper case. On the money available, they can't, get witness statements, corroborating documents from police or prisons where the person has been previously taken, medical reports to attest to torture, statements from friends and family. You can't do that on the minimal amount of money that's now available for asylum cases. And of course, as a result, large numbers of solicitors have left legal aid asylum work because they simply cannot, they know they cannot do a proper case. So they're not even trying. So now, for LGBT asylum seekers to get legal representation, never mind get a proper case, it's a real uphill battle. Often, they rely on people like me and others to help them prepare their cases and to get the documentation they need, because simply they can't get legal representation. Now, I've got to say that all these issues and problems relate to refugees in general. The same basic problems of detention, fast track, and cuts in legal aid, that's a problem for all refugees, whether they're fleeing political persecution, religious persecution, ethnic persecution, gender persecution, whatever the cause, the system is rigged to fail them. The system is rigged to fail them. The government wants to stop as many people as possible claiming asylum. So that's why it has detention, fast track, and cuts in legal aid, to make it more likely that asylum seekers will fail in their applications and appeals and be sent back, so that they can boast to the Daily Mail and UKIP that they're getting rid of these asylum seekers from the country. Truly, truly shameful. But there are additional problems faced by LGBT refugees. Until 2010, the government used to argue that a person who had suffered homophobic or transphobic persecution could go back to their home country and behave with discretion. If they were discreet, then no one would know they're LGBT and they wouldn't suffer any further persecution. And discretion means things like change your name, move to a part of the country where no one knows you, and stop having gay relationships. They never ever say that, or similar things, to political or religious or ethnic refugees. Never, they never dream of saying it. But they used to say that to LGBT refugees until, thankfully, a High Court case in 2010 ruled that it was illegal. So now the crafty Home Office has developed a new strategy, which is to refuse to accept that the claimant is LGBT or T. So they may have letters from their partner, photographs of them together at parties, dancing together, and so on, statements from friends and family, but they'll say it's all concocted. So the question is, what would an LGBT refugee have to produce as evidence to prove they're LGBT? We've asked the government, they refuse to say. They go along with these judgments, they accept the judgments, but they won't tell us what is the required level of proof. So what's happening nowadays is increasingly some desperate refugees are filming and photographing them having sex with their partners. I mean, this is truly shocking that they feel obliged to do this. But it's desperation. It is desperation. And this is, of course, very, very, very painful for many of these people, because many of them come from deeply religious or conservative cultures where any kind of expression of affection or nakedness, let alone actual sex, is deeply, deeply taboo. But they feel forced to do it because otherwise they feel they're disbelieved. The Home Office and adjudicators don't stop there. In a notorious case last year, a man produced the videos and photographs of him having sex with his partner, but they all showed him being anally penetrated, and the adjudicator and this Home Office barrister said, well, that's all very interesting, but you haven't got an erection while he's fucking you, so you can't be gay. That wasn't exactly the words, but I don't think he used the word fucking, but anyway. You get my message, you get my drift. So, really, this is a pretty damning indictment of the asylum system, that we treat people in this way. We as a country supported and helped shape the 1951 Refugee Convention. Responding to the horrors of Nazism and other persecutions, we resolved as a nation that we would provide a safe haven. Now, all the efforts at the top are geared to denying people a safe haven. It's all very well having good LGBT laws that guarantee equality and non-discrimination. But the second part is, how are they actually enforced and interpreted? So, for example, you may know that I was very much involved with outrage in the Stop Murder Music campaign against 8 Jamaican reggae and dancehall singers who put out tracks that were not merely homophobic, actually incited the murder of LGBT people. The shooting, hanging, burning, and drowning of people because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, incitement to murder is a very serious criminal offence in this country and every country. Yet, as far as I know, none of these singers has ever been even arrested, let alone prosecuted or convicted. They've been allowed to come to this country and perform. And when there have been protests against them, the police have protected these murder music singers. Now cast your mind back. The leader of the Nation of Islam in the United States, Louis Farrakhan, has been banned from Britain for over 25 years. Banned from coming to this country. Yet, as far as I know, he's never advocated violence against anyone. He's banned for 25 years these murder music singers who openly and proudly call for the murder of LGBT people. They are given visas and work permits by successive Labour and Conservative Liberal Democrat governments. Double standards? I think so. Double standards, definitely. You think of the example of Islamist hate terrorists. When Sheikh Abdullah al-Faisal in 2004 incited the murder of Jews and Hindus, he was promptly arrested, prosecuted, convicted, and jailed for 9 years. Yet soon afterwards, another Islamist cleric, Imam Abdul Muhid, openly advocated the killing of gay people. He wasn't even taken to court. Not even taken to court. Double standard. Why should our community be treated in this unequal way? What are we doing? What is it about us that does not deserve the equal protection of the law? I think the UKIP vote is undoubtedly a protest vote. For most people, it's a protest vote. It's not necessarily they believe in all the UKIP agenda, if they know what that is. It's that they're fed up with the mainstream parties, they're fed up with the political system, they want to give politicians a kick in the teeth. Of course, my response is, if that's really what they feel, why not vote for the Greens or one of the Left Unity or one of those parties, if you're angry with the big three, choose a progressive alternative rather than a reactionary one. But sadly, that's the way a lot of them, as you say, likely to vote on Thursday. I think at the end of the day, the more UKIP is exposed to the light of day, the more people will gradually and slowly come to a realisation about what they really stand for. In the European Parliament, they sit with openly racist and fascist parties, as well as homophobic ones and sexist ones. That's a clear example of the kinds of alliances and collusions they're prepared to make. I don't think that they themselves are likely to introduce any homophobic or racist policies, although they might, if they had power, seek to reverse the legalisation of same-sex marriage. Beyond that, I think they would actually be quite cautious, but the danger is they create this climate atmosphere where hostility towards immigrants and asylum seekers, Muslim people, LGBT people and others, is given credibility. But they give it a sort of stamp of authority and credibility. But at the end of the day, I suppose also, a lot of the people who vote for UKIP or plan to vote for UKIP, they seem sadly to be impervious to evidence and rational argument.
That's my point. I couldn't get through it without data and facts. It's bouncing off.
Yeah, and that is quite scary. You can think, how fascism could arise in this country. This sort of let's damn more. Let's vote for these outsiders and this fringe party to show the political elite that we're fed up. That's very, very dangerous. Very dangerous. That's how fascism does begin. And I don't think that UKIP is fascist, but I think there's certain people within it who harbour, proto-fascist ideas. My first great passion was art and design. And that's why I worked. I left school at 16, no A-levels. I went to work in a big department store. I learned sign writing and design and graphics on the job. I had aspirations about to be an architect or a stage designer or something like that. So that's probably what I would be if I wasn't doing what I am now.
Do you think you'd still be able to pursue your activism on the side? What sort of approach would you take if you had a different career?
But of course, activism doesn't have to be a full-time, 24/7 engagement. In fact, in the early days when I was working in my late teens, early 20s, it was something I did on weekends and in the evenings, and not every day and every night. I remember as a 16-year-old, I went off and this is my hometown of Melbourne, Australia, and students who are running Students for a Democratic Society, which was campaigning against Australia's involvement in the war in Vietnam and against the draft. And I did that probably 2 or 3 nights a week. But the other nights of the week I was off, partying with friends like any teenager. Of course, globally, the picture is very, very different. For most countries around the world, they've hardly begun. Yet, in almost every country, either openly or covertly, there are LGBT organizations. Sometimes very loudly demanding rights, sometimes more quietly and subtly seeking a fairer deal in their society. The one thing I do know is that queer freedom is an unstoppable global trend. Nothing can hold back the tide of rights, justice and freedom. No tyranny, homophobic or otherwise, lasts forever. At the end of the day, every tyranny, every prejudice has its fall. Slavery was taken for granted centuries ago. Some people thought it could never ever be ended. Women were denied the vote until just over 100 years ago, and many people argued that it was the natural order and that was always the way it was going to be. Well, likewise, when it comes to LGBT rights and freedom. People may say that it's the natural order or the way things have always been, particularly in conservative traditional countries. But the quest for human freedom, for the right to love the person of your choice, is an unstoppable global trend. And just like slavery and the denial of votes to women, homophobia and transphobia will one day be history.